1848, the springtime of the peoples. Europe is the center of the world, and the continental economy is skyrocketing thanks to the benefits of the Industrial Revolution. This climate of economic change marks the end of agrarian subsistence economies and the crisis of absolutistic forms of government which find no place in the new industrialized world. In France, dissatisfaction festers among the petite bourgeoisie. This social class, whose name literally means the small bourgeoisie, comprises semi-autonomous peasants and small-scale merchants with aspirations to ascend to the high bourgeoisie. They are dissatisfied by an electoral system where only the landowners are permitted to vote. A series of contributing factors, mainly of economic nature, lead to the insurgency of the Parisians on the 22nd of February 1848. The bourgeois monarch Louis-Philippe is forced to abdicate, and universal male suffrage is enacted, giving France 9 million new voters. While the European nations deal with these political revolutions, some German thinkers are already theorizing the next step, social revolution. Marx and Engels published the Communist Manifesto, proclaiming that a spectre is hunting Europe, the spectre of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this spectre, pointing out that the governments of the time feared the social uprising and tipping power that would come of communism. Marx and Engels end the manifesto with a call to a forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions, which pushes the newborn industrial working class, the so-called proletarians, to rise to power through revolution. In France, the bourgeoisie joins with the working classes to fight for proper participation in the government for all sections and classes of society. One might think that the united front of proletarians and bourgeois would indicate that Marx was wrong about the conflict of classes. But a few months after the formation of the Second French Republic, the working classes are disillusioned by the small share of the promised political participation and decide to revolt in the streets of Paris. This frightens the bourgeoisie that decides to repress the uprising during the period that will be remembered as the June Days. It would seem that Marx was right. For him, the class conflict is a constant in history and comes from the relationship between the proprietors and the workers. Earlier in history, the conflict was between masters and slaves who tried to rebel from time to time, with every revolt immediately repressed. In the Middle Ages, there are the peasants, who also try to rise against social injustice from time to time, but in the end the lords restore order with the use of force. In 1848 France, there are no slaves or servants. No one is forced to work for anybody else because of birthright. It is a liberal society, but factories are full of workers who do exhausting jobs, while the factory owners profit and lead comfortable lives. The factory owners are the bourgeois and the industrialists. They have the power, but why them? It's because they had led the French Revolution of 1789. If class conflict is a constant in history, the resistance of proletarians is what keeps history going forward. Marx is convinced that the resistance must be guided in order to achieve real victory, but he also believes that class conflict is inevitable, regardless of whether or not there is a leader or a party that can guide the oppressed. He sees examples all over in history. For instance, in 1356 the French peasants revolted against the nobles. They attacked the castles, killing whoever is inside and burning everything along the way. It seemed that the pyramidal feudal system was about to collapse. The clergymen used to preach that everyone has their own role. They have to pray to God to grant heaven to the people. Nobles grow up wealthy, but they have the vital duty of defending the country from enemies of all kinds. Others are born to work. Each one fulfills their duty in full harmony. Except, France was at war with England and the French knights were consistently defeated. The French king is a prisoner of the English and a huge amount of money is required as ransom. The war is funded by heavier and heavier taxes on the peasants, who are not even being adequately protected by the nobles. And this catalyzes the revolt. What's the point of funding these nobles? Let's kill them all! Alas, in just a few weeks, the nobles organize themselves and the revolt is repressed in bloodshed. Even if class conflict was a constant in history, what guarantees do we have that it will occur indefinitely? One could say that the people who are poor and oppressed are the vast majority of the population, and so it's fair to expect conflicts to erupt. However, the distinction between rich and poor, as in Marx's vision, is too simplistic. There are tons of shades of wealth, and thus each stratum of socioeconomic classes is smaller, leading to less likelihood of large-scale conflicts arising. Additionally, social mobility or improving one's conditions within a class sometimes leads to efforts to maintain the status quo and avoid conflict. Even in the Middle Age, there were wealthy peasants who were looking for a stable society where everyone could live in peace. This desire for political stability is manifested in the mid-19th century France too. The monarchy has collapsed, and Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew is elected president of the Second French Republic. In a few months, he reforms the government and becomes Emperor Napoleon III, supported by many strata of the population, particularly farmers. After some protests against absolutism, many are arrested, and in a matter of days everything ends and the majority of the French people are calm and satisfied with this renewed stability. People prefer the safety of an able dictatorship to the uncertainty of revolution. This desire for peace and stability at times is sufficient to stifle any class conflict. In 1851, Camillo Benso, Count of Cavour, writes, "The fear of socialism overcomes the love of freedom in the French. A great lesson." It is quite apparent that the idea of conflict is not welcomed by the majority. The uncertainty of the future often holds back change. Of course, unpredictable events can take place, such as in the 2019 Chile, where a 4% fare hike, raising the price of a ride on the capital's metro system by 30 pesos, or about 4 cents, ignites mass protests. In 2020, society is fragmented into small communities that rarely join forces to improve the conditions of what today resembles a modern equivalent of the proletariat, those with fewer privileges and the greatest economic need. What does an individual who dislikes the status quo of modern society do? Do they unite with others to bring to light the class struggle? Historian Steve Fraser assessed that class conflicts is an inevitability if current political and economic conditions continue, noting that people are increasingly fed up, their voices are not being heard. And I think that can only go on for so long without there being more and more outbreaks of what used to be called class struggle, class warfare. But who is to say that those political and economic conditions which divide people are here to stay? Could we imagine a time where the notion of class and the conflicts between them are no longer relevant? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more enlightening history.